Thank you, RMG, for inviting me to talk on sales growth strategies. I was delighted to accept the invite because I'm one of those strange people. Don't know if there's that many of us who really enjoy talking about sales and marketing and growth strategies for businesses. And the main reason that I enjoy doing it is because it allows me to share what I describe as my quest. And my quest started around 20 years ago as I started to move up the career ladder, because what I found as I started to sit around leadership tables is that the departments such as finance, operations, technical, HR, etc., all the departments which had experts sitting around that table, people would listen attentively to what they said, and there was pretty much limited challenge because they saw those people as experts in their field. What I found was that when it got to sales and marketing, however, there was a lack of respect. Everybody had an opinion. So even if they'd never done sales before or they didn't even know what marketing was, they would start giving their opinions on what should be done around the sales and marketing space. Firstly, it slightly irked me, but secondly, it made me start to think about why is it that all those other disciplines are seen as disciplines and are respected, but sales and marketing wasn't. And what I started to understand as I started to analyse these things is that all those other areas tend to have a process, a reproducible process, and sales and marketing, most people don't believe there is. And if you don't have a reproducible process, you don't get reproducible results, and it's not seen as a discipline. So I started really investigating and delving into this and looking, well, how do you ensure that happens? And what I found was that the actual barriers to sales and marketing getting respect are exactly the same as the barriers which lead to lack of sales growth, which actually hamper your sales growth. And those two key things that I found were actually preparation and process. In the sales arena, people don't prepare to the level that they should do, in my opinion, and there isn't a process. And if there is a process, if we're lucky enough to have it in a business where there is an actual specific sales process, it's very rarely followed rigorously. And that led me to start being obsessive about my quest and try to codify it, which I did, and I have done over that 20 years, but I finally codified it properly in the Sales Acceleration Formula book that I wrote earlier this year. Now, this isn't a shameless plug for the book, but I did codify it in the book, so it makes sense to put it there. So the question always is, when you write a book or you're talking, you're presenting about growth strategies, is it just a theory or does it actually work? Well, I can guarantee that it works because I've employed it in my own personal career and also into other businesses. So I've used it from the time, as a sales person. So you can use it in sales arenas. I've used it in regional management arenas. So as you get to smaller teams, sales teams. I've also used it in larger organizations when you're leading commercial organizations. And then, I've used it in the UK. So it's been used in the UK, but it's also been used internationally, not just when breaking into international markets, but I've also trained this into probably about 20 or 25 different international markets around the globe, and each time this methodology has been proven to work, and it's been proven to work in a number of ways. I've just put them on there. I'm not going to go through all of those, but suffice it to say that it can reduce your sales cycle quite significantly. It can help you launch your products more quickly and more effectively. It can also ensure that if you have flat sales or sales aren't going well, it can analyze that situation and then hopefully kickstart that process again. So that's about the theory. It's not just theory. So let's move on to what the actual process is. And as it says there, it's as simple as adapting how you work. And that adapting works on two fronts, because I'm saying, number one, adapting, because if you were doing the right things, you would already be getting the right results. So this is about adapting your methodology to ensure that you start achieving the results that you want in terms of sales growth. But then adapt is also my mnemonic that most sales or commercial people always like to have a mnemonic. So I've got one, and it is basically adapt. So I'm just going to take a few minutes to go through the adapt. Obviously, it's going to be a quick whistle-stop tour because it's a very short period of time that I have to present on this. But I'll go through it, and then I'm going to give an example, a real-life example of where this has been implemented and how it's worked. So going from the top right, we start with the A. And the first one is about the account. And I use the terminology often, fish where the fishes are, i.e. make sure that you are going to places that if you work in those accounts and you're successful, they'll give you a large amount of business rather than going places where actually there isn't really business to be had. So I use a 4-box matrix here. Apologies if you can't see it that clearly, but it's a 4-box matrix. On the horizontal axis, you have probability, which is across the bottom, and on the vertical axis, you've got attractiveness. So the attractiveness axis, and that attractiveness depends on what you find to be your potential in your business. So it could be sales, it could be headroom, it could be market share, a lot of parameters you can put in there. But what this grid allows you to do is take those parameters and then put it together in what we call an attractiveness index. Then along the bottom, on the horizontal axis, you've got probability. So that's the likelihood of that occurring. So that could be whether or not they've got a budget, whether or not they like you, whether you've got relationships in there, etc. There's a whole raft. But then again, you then put those parameters which are specific to your business into the probability index, and then you plot them. So what you're then seeing is you've got 4 priority quadrants. Priority 1, which is the top right, basically says that this is attractive, so there's a lot of business there if you are successful, but the probability is high. So they're your quicker wins. And then I'm not going to go through them all, but just to note on the priority 4, that's basically saying you've got low attractiveness and low probability, so you automatically bin those. Don't even think about working there. That's one of the biggest mistakes people do, is that they have those accounts and they still keep working there because they think, oh, I can get something out of there. Whereas if you use this index, then you know that actually you shouldn't be working there. So that's the first step. It's making sure that you're working in the right areas, and this grid and this segmentation allows you to do it. The second one is moving on to, right, you now know where you're working. You now need to understand what are the decisions that are going to make the difference to you getting to where you want to get to. So effectively, you have an overarching objective. And let's say your overarching objective is to get from A to Z. So to get from A to Z, rather than try to bite it off in one chunk, you break it down into decisions. So there will be a decision which takes you from A to B, a decision that takes you from B to C, and so on and so forth till you get to Z. That then allows you to break it into chunks so that you can move quite rapidly through it. And the way you do that is then build a decision-making unit for each of those decisions. Because whilst it is possible that the decisions which take you from A to B to C and get you all the way to Z is based on the same decision-making unit, and that may be the case in a small organization. In large organizations or complex sales cycles, that is very unlikely. So you want to break it down so that you've got a decision-making unit for every single decision. You can then analyze that decision-making unit, and that then allows you to start moving forward. Again, apologies if you can't see this super clearly, but this is a way to analyze each decision-making unit for each decision, and it breaks it down. I'm not going to go through every single thing on there, but it allows you to say, are the people in there positive, negative? Are they going to be champions for you? Are they going to help you? And that's the colour, the traffic light system that you can see there. The lines that you see there show the direction of influence, so who influences who within that. The titles across the top horizontally are showing how do they make their decisions. Are they users? Are they technical decision makers? Are they going to make it along economic grounds? And up on the vertical axis there, it's basically showing their level of influence. So this is really, you're at the stage now where you're saying, yes, I know where I'm working. Yes, I know who the people I need to speak to. So you're understanding the process of that sales cycle, and you're breaking it down, and then you're working the right people, and then you're building an action plan for each of those decision-making units. Then moving on, awake, we call this, could have easily called it awareness of what keeps the decision makers awake at night. And this is a really important thing, because you've built up all these tables, you know where you should be working, you know who the people are that you want to be working with. The next step is, okay, so do we know specifically when you're working with a decision maker in the decision making unit, do we know exactly what they're in business to do? What are their objectives? What are their appraisal scores going to be on? Because whether you are there or not, those people are in business to deliver something. And we need to understand what that is, because once you know what that is, then you can move on to the next step, which is presenting the one chance to make a first impression. I think it's really important to note at this stage, that's all about preparation. So if you remember back to that slide about my quest, one of the biggest challenges is lack of preparation. This is what people don't do, because if you do all that, the first 3 steps, when you get to the P, then you're presenting based on knowledge. You're presenting the right solutions in the right manner to the right people. That makes a significant difference to your results. And that comes down to making sure that you have the right people. So that's important, because you need to have the right people with the right skills. And if you don't have the right skills, but they have the right attitude, then you give them the skills, you train them, you develop them into the right way. And then that then moves on. We would love to say that, yes, you've done all that stuff. Everybody's going to be absolutely delighted with what you said, and they're going to buy whatever you're selling. There's going to be objections. There's going to be challenges. So you need to have, again, the right people with the right skills to be able to overcome that. But if you've done all that work and that pre-work, this makes the last two steps, where the people are in front of the customers, the people are online with customers, etc. It makes that significantly easier, and it accelerates the sales cycle. Hence, the sales acceleration formula. So that's just looking at it again in the round, so you can see it in its entirety. So what I'm going to do now is give you an example of how I've used this, and I've used this with lots of businesses, and lots of businesses have used this once I've trained it into those businesses. But bearing in mind, I think RMG invited me on this call because I work for Vernicare, and that's how I've come across RMG over the last few years. Then it makes sense to give an example, which is a live example, which is Vernicare. So I'm going to go through it. I'm not going to go through every single year, so don't worry, but I'm just going to give you some key highlights. So in 2014, I joined Vernicare, and I joined as a consultant on 2 days a week. And we were turning over in that international division 5.5 million. So this is specifically the international division. And at that point, what I did was exactly kick in the sales acceleration formula. I identified the key target markets, because I said, well, right, and I did that exact segmentation. What's the likelihood that we're going to be able to work in these markets, and what's the probability in these markets? So I identified those markets. Then I started to try and understand the sales process. Who are the decision makers? What's the process? How does it work? And to do that, what I did was I actually poached a very experienced UK salesperson. He was the rep of the year, or the salesperson of the year in the UK, because I thought that's going to accelerate, again, my decision making and my understanding of that decision making process within the markets that I want to work in within that sales cycle. Then that also helped me accelerate the understanding of the customer intent. So I started to get all those pieces in place before I got anywhere near delivery plans for the markets. Now, when you're doing all this sort of analysis, it may take you 2 weeks, it may take you 6 weeks, it may take you 6 months. But I guarantee if you do it, and when you do it, it then means that you completely truncate the rest of the sales cycle. It means that you're going to increase your chances of success. So it's very, very important that you do that period. 2015, because we've done all that, we grew to 6.2 million. And I think it's important to say at this stage that prior to 2014, we're pretty flat in terms of sales. Vernicare was pretty flat in terms of sales. This was a significant jump in growth, going from 5.5 million to 6.2 million. We then started the process in terms of headhunting staff. So I specifically looked for the right sort of people. Remember I said looking at skills and upskilling and getting the right people in place. We headhunted, and that's where I first came across RMG, because RMG were the people who recruited my first members of staff, who are still with me today. We then started to refine the messaging and the marketing messages, start putting training plans in for the staff and then also the distributors who were going to be selling in different markets. At that point, we had 3 business development managers. And then the key here, and you'll see this all the way through, we then start to analyze what's going on, reviewing it, and then acting. Do you need to change it? Do you keep it the same, etc.? That's really important. 2017, 8.8 million. We'd grown the team, or we started to grow the team there, because people or the organisation could see that actually the process is working. So you start putting more people on, getting into more markets. So we started entering markets like Japan, LATAM, because you now have a growth engine, you now have a process that you know works, but always analysing, reviewing, and then acting. It's not about, yeah, it worked, so we just keep doing the same thing. We look at what works, we look at what's not working, and you review. 2019, as I said, I'm not going through every single year. I'm just putting the notable years. 2019, 13.8 million. Another significant uplift as we start to bring new products into the marketplace, because we've now got a growth engine. So we now know, actually, we've got a sales team, we've got a commercial team, we've got messaging that you start putting new products into, and you've got a channel to put them in and enter them into the market successfully and rapidly. So you then start looking at further new markets, and again, analysing, reviewing, and acting all along the way. 2020, 18.7 million. We all know what happened in 2020. It's the COVID era, and that brings challenges, but also brings opportunities. Because again, as I said, you're always reviewing, and in the pandemic, the target markets have changed. Wernicke is an infection prevention organisation. There's an infection outbreak. Effectively, it's a virus, it's an infection outbreak, and therefore the markets, when you remember what I said about the 4-box matrices in terms of where you want to go, the markets in terms of probability have now changed. Because if you've got a massive outbreak such as the UK, such as Mexico, such as Japan, then those markets are much more likely to now listen to your message. So you then refocus where you're going. So we refocused, and that's why we had such a strong year, because we started targeting the markets where we could have the most likelihood and the most probability that they would want to listen to our message. The processes have also changed. The processes have changed because you can no longer get in front of people. So you have to then look at what is it that you're going to do. Because the process has changed, the probability has changed, so you have to change the way in which you work, which is exactly what we did. And then we delivered, as you can see, substantial sales growth again. So as always, you then analyse if you're an act, because the pandemic is not going to be here. So we're now looking at, and we looked at the end of last year, what we're going to be doing this year, that the pandemic starts to change. What's the new normal? Are the markets that we want to be going into still the same? Yes, in some cases, no in others. So that's just a real short whistle-stop tour through the Sales Accelerator process and how it actually works in practice to prove that it's not just theory. So in summary, if you recall, when I was talking about my quest, I said the two biggest challenges were around process and preparation. Well, that's the process, the sales acceleration formula, and that's the real preparation that you do. And what you'll notice if you look at that, and I always really want to emphasize that, 2/3 is preparation. The question I always ask to people when they're struggling with delivering consistent sales and delivering a consistent process, do you spend 2/3 of your time in preparation, or do you spend most of your time just getting out and getting in front of customers and trying to give them the messages? Because if you're not spending 2/3 of your time in preparation, you're destined to fail. So in summary, all this says really is target the right places, understand the process and the people within the sales cycle, get the right staff so that they can execute, and then develop them to do the right things. So you may well be wondering why I've got a picture of a boat on this slide, and it's based on the fact that there's a video which I'm not going to have time to play today, but I suggest you watch, and we can make it available to you, and it's called Does It Make the Boat Go Faster? And it's an Olympic rower who's talking about exactly that concept, that when they were training, when they were preparing for the Olympics, everything they looked at was, does it make the boat go faster? So if it did, they would do it. But if it didn't, and I think the example that you give is going to the pub, going up to meet with friends, if leading up to that Olympics, that needed to be cut out, they wouldn't do it, because they just wanted to focus on the things that would make the boat go faster. And the sales acceleration formula plays into that mentality, i.e., only focus on the key things that are going to drive your business forward, because that will lead to making the boat go faster. It will lead to a truncated sales cycle, and it means that you will not spend or expend energy on things that aren't going to deliver. So things such as going to the wrong account, seeing the wrong people, not trying to affect the correct decisions. So it's all about how do you make the boat go faster. So thank you very much for joining me and listening to my quest, and feel free to contact me to get any further information.